To magnetize or to not magnetize? That is the question. And the other question is, how do you do it? People have been magnetizing their models forever, but there's always been a bit of disagreement about whether you should or whether you shouldn't. And to be honest, it all comes down to preference. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the positives and some of the negatives of magnetizing your miniatures. One of the main pros for magnetizing your models is the ability to change your loadout. This is beneficial for when the meta changes, which it often does, and this is going to give you access to all the different loadouts for each miniature. And this also ties into the next one, which is cost effectiveness. By magnetizing your models, there is no need to buy additional models for no reason other than for having a separate loadout. As you change your lists, you can also change your models. This is especially useful when it comes to games where it's a case of what you see is what you get. So when it comes to certain models, like for example the Hunters of Huan Chi, when you have models like the chameleons and they have the blow darts, you have a chance of, if you glue them together, then there's a chance that the blow darts are going to bend and possibly break. If you do decide to magnetize the models, then in this case you'd be able to have the blow darts separately, so this would minimize any chances of any bends or breaks. When it comes to storage, magnetizing larger models, especially those like Angron or tanks, can be beneficial as you're going to save up on a bit of space in your storage container. So I'd say one of the main things to consider when it comes to magnetizing models, especially if it comes to doing something like an army, is the cost of magnets across the whole force. So let's say if you're doing a lot of infantry models across an entire army, that's going to be a fair few magnets, and that is going to add up in cost. So you'd have to compare the cost of all those magnets against just buying a new model. I'd say one of the biggest risks of magnetizing your models is the fact that you could easily lose some of the pieces. In some cases you have parts that are shared between 2 out of 3 of the configurations or options, and you need to have them magnetized separately, but if you lose that one part, that's 2 options gone. One of the ways to combat this is to make sure that you have each model and all options available. I like to keep my models, when they are magnetized, I like to keep them in a little bag where I have each of the options available and they all stay together. This is just going to help me because I have a habit of losing things, so just having them all together in one bag is a lot easier for me. So I'd say the main question, and probably one of the main reasons why you're here, is how do you actually magnetize your models? So we're going to go over to this desk and we're going to get started. For this mini tutorial, I'm going to be working with the Farstalker kin band. Specifically, I'm going to be using the Kroot Heavy Gunner, as this model comes with 3 options. To start off, we're going to be building the model as per the instructions, making sure to cut as close to the model with our snips without damaging it. As always, our next step is to remove any sprue tabs and mould lines with the back of our knife, before gluing all of our pieces together with some Tamiya ultra thin plastic cement. With the universal parts now glued together, we can start working on our first model option, the Kroot Warrior. For this option we need to snip and clean the rifle from the sprue, taking care not to damage any of the sculpt. I then attach the arm using some more plastic cement. When magnetizing, we want to ensure that everything lines up exactly how we want it, so I recommend doing a quick dry fit before going into the next step, which is using a thumbtack or an old airbrush needle to mark the middle of the area we want to magnetize. To make it easier to drill, I use the tip of my knife to expand the hole, applying enough pressure to accommodate the drill bit. Speaking of which, I'm going to be using a 1mm drill bit for my pin vise. You could use an electric pin vise here, but I like the control of a manual one. I used a 1mm bit as I'm going to be using one of these tiny 1mm by 1mm magnets. The polarity of the first magnet is not all that important, but what is that the magnet needs to sit flush against the surface of the model. So do your best to remove it and drill a little further. To glue the magnets in place, I like to apply thin superglue with a cocktail stick. You could use gel superglue here, but I had thin to hand. When it comes to the other shoulder joint, I like the polarity to be the same as the previous. This just makes things a little easier long term. When it comes to finding out where to drill on the gun arm, the best thing I recommend is to apply a dot of paint, in this case XB88. I apply this to the magnet in the shoulder before dry fitting the arm into position. I like to position this where it is going to be on the final assembly. Because the paint is still wet, this is going to transfer that dot onto the other arm. This is going to show us exactly where we need to place our other magnet. From here you can follow the previous steps to apply your magnet. One thing to be careful of is when drilling the holes in the arms, you don't drill too deep and come out of the other side. So I would recommend checking every so often that you haven't done so. After all, these magnets are only 1 by 1mm. Once you're happy and have made sure you have the right polarity, you can glue the opposing magnet in place. And just like that, you've got your first magnetized part. Then it's just a case of repeating this step over and over and over again. For the second and third option of this model specifically, there is a little bit more that needs to be done. As with the left arm, this piece is needed for both loadouts. In this case, the piece needs to be magnetized in two areas, one at the shoulder and one at the wrist. Be very careful with your polarity here, as it will be a nightmare to try and get the magnets out afterwards. If you're working with this kit specifically, then I would recommend drilling the wrist while it is still on the sprue. This is going to help you avoid snapping a very thin connection point between the wrist and the gun. Luckily, the wrist is in a position that the paint trick will work quite nicely. Once we've completed all those steps again, we now have access to all three loadouts. If you've enjoyed this video or you have found it at all useful, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.